Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. I often wonder if, in our Western context, we've so fused the American dream with the risen Christ that when suffering enters our lives and does not leave quickly, all we know how to do is hide, judge, or despair. Prolonged experiences of weakness, pain, or loss often places us in a position that feels vulnerable and unsteady. How do we keep on living with pain that has no foreseeable ending? In this episode, my friend Jenn joins me to share about her husband John's cancer journey. She shares about the moment that life unraveled with a phone call, her agonizing trip to the hospital, and the long journey her family has since walked over the last 11 years. What Jenn so beautifully demonstrates is that grace isn't always about rescue. It is often about God's presence meeting us in weakness and sustaining us in sorrow. Grace isn't just about the power to overcome, but the power to endure. While suffering can cause us to question God's nearness, Jenn bears witness to the truth that living with pain that lingers can mean more fully receiving God's presence that lasts. Listen in. Well, welcome to Faith and Feelings, Jenn. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
I was thinking about it earlier today, and I think other than my family, I've spent the most holidays at your house.
Yay!
Yay! I love having you as a guest on the podcast, but since I was 9, I've known you as an auntie. So we met when both of our families were living overseas, and since then we've lived a lot of life together. And now my sister is married to your son, so it just continues, which is so fun.
Yes.
But we are in a series on the podcast right now called When Life Doesn't Make Sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the moment, I think I was in high school maybe, when I heard that your husband had collapsed and was being taken to the hospital in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Can you share a little bit about that story and what that moment was like for you?
Absolutely. It's actually been almost 11 years. Wow. In May, it'll be 11 years. But I remember like it was yesterday. It was, my kids had sleepovers in our house, and I got a call at 5 a.m. that John had collapsed and they didn't know if he was alive, but they would let me know whatever they found out as soon as they found out. So we were very far away in another country, and it was going to take me 18 hours to get to him by plane. And it was one of those moments where I couldn't hold myself up, and yet I felt very held up.
What were you thinking? What were you feeling?
In the moment, I think there's that fight, flight, or freeze that happens, and I think I'm a quick on my feet in the middle of an emergency kind of person. And so in the moment, it was just like, I need to get to Thailand. But I think as I called a friend of mine, you have a very short list of people you can call at 5 a.m. to wake them up to come to your house. And I called my friend Catherine, and she was over in a minute, and I just collapsed. I mean, in her presence, I just felt like, is this the end? Was pretty much what I was thinking. We had spent at that point, nearly 20 years on the field. And I just felt like the world was spinning. But in such a way of, also in that supernatural way of being held by God, I felt really, like, looking back, I think I'm not sure how I endured those moments. And I think a lot of people can testify to being held in some pretty scary moments. But just felt, I was definitely scared. But I have to actually go back a few days prior. I was on the phone with a friend of mine, and I told her, and she told me this later, but she told me that I had said to her, something is going to happen to our family, and it's going to be really hard, but God's going to get us through. And honestly, it was that, and just a couple other just reminders, like, someone might call it a God wink, like a way in which God just says, I'm here. I'm here. We don't know what's going to happen, but I'm here. And just definitely felt in the middle of my fear, in the middle of complete shock, I felt the presence of God with me.
I'm thinking about that 18-hour trip to the hospital. Do you remember the trip at all? What was that? Were you by yourself?
Mm-hmm. I was by myself. I called another friend of mine. So again, very short list of friends. I can can you take care of my 4 kids for I don't know how long? And a girlfriend of mine who had just had a baby and had 3 kids at home. She and her husband moved right into our apartment to be with our kids. So we're just collecting everybody and making sure everyone was where they were supposed to be. I don't remember what I threw into a suitcase, but I threw some things into a suitcase. Apparently not very helpful things, but I had I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And I was in the taxi going to the airport, and I called my mom. And I, again, have the gift of having a mom who is so steady in the middle of, this is not her first phone call from me in the middle of crisis. And just hearing her voice assuring me that God was with me, God was with us, and that we would get through whatever was in front of us, we would get through. And I think that got me onto the plane. And I was sitting next, just a kind of a silly side note, but I hit the worst turbulence on that flight. Flew from our city to Korea, and then I had an 8-hour layover, and then I had another long flight to Thailand. And the worst turbulence, and the guy sitting next to me grabbed my hand, and I was like, dude, I'm more scared than you.
Yeah.
In some ways, I felt it was just humorous, because here I am loved by the Lord, just felt his presence with me. And I actually wasn't scared of the turbulence. And, but it was just a moment I actually remember from the flight, and getting to Korea and having an 8-hour layover in an airport that is just filled with duty-free shops, and everyone's bustling. And I just felt so alone. I just wanted to go to a corner of the airport and just pray. I just wanted to just bury my head in a pillow and scream. I just wanted to be by myself. I didn't know how I was going to get through 8 hours. And God brought really kind people, including several people who were headed to the same conference that my husband was speaking at. I saw them in this crazy, people-filled airport, saw friends who live in various parts of the world. And I felt like God was, and then on my flight to Thailand, God put me next to a very kind woman who just held my hand and prayed for me. I think God's always He's always present with us, but I think having eyes to see how he shows up for us, um, just especially in the kindness of a stranger. Yeah, that plane ride was long, felt longer than 18 hours. And landed there, and our director met us. A director's wife met me, sorry, not us. It was a very tired us that showed up. And she said, he's out of surgery, he's alive. They're doing pathology. It's cancer. And I was just like, what? Like, you're just moving like from like he's gone to, like, he was just passing blood to he's gone to he was in surgery and it's cancer. And it's a word anybody listening, you know what I mean, that there's nothing in all the world that can prepare you to hear the C word. And that was another grief. Yeah, because that meant there was more ahead of us. Yeah.
What happened next?
I got to the hospital, and I mean, I feel so, our story is just filled with just people who love us, who came alongside us, who showed up as family for us because we were so far away from our own family. A dear, dear friend had stayed with John the whole time in the hospital and waited outside the surgery room, and was there when they wheeled him back in to his room. Got there as John was coming in, and it's such a surreal moment where you're just like, the last time I saw you, you were getting ready to get on a plane to go speak at a conference, and now you're just coming out of this really long, complicated surgery, and they found a tumor. And I think the days that unfolded, the moments that unfolded after, were actually the harder ones. Because there's something about adrenaline that gets you through those initial moments. But I think it was those moments lying on that plastic couch. It's like a 4-foot by 2-foot little couch in the hospital. And just lying awake at night, just lying awake going, what just happened? My reality, our reality, what we thought was secure and safe is not. And I'm here in a hospital room. Mm-hmm. And my husband has cancer.
The losses feel uncountable.
Mm-hmm.
What has it looked like for you to grieve and continue to grieve those losses?
I think perhaps the greatest loss was just the ability to dream, like, with abandon. Like, I think those early days, it was that innocence that was lost. Like, we're still young. Our kids are, we were in our best moments of ministry and life together. Our family was just thriving. And then all of a sudden, I'm thinking, will I have 5 years with him? Will I have 10? And then I just found myself crying every time I saw an older couple. Even at the hospital, I saw just the sweetest, I think when you're looking for something, you see it, and I just saw the sweetest older couples caring for each other. And I would just burst into tears. And I go out and just walk on the streets and just cry because I didn't want John to see me crying like that. I think there's something about, when you're the person with the sickness or enduring it is different than the spouse or someone close. And I think the trauma of that, for me, just imagining, it was hard to just push away thoughts of like, I'm going to have to figure out my life on my own. I'm going to one day be a widow. And I would say those thoughts are they're there, but they don't hit me in the same way. They're part of the grief, I think, that I still carry. Initially it was prayers of like, Lord, would you just keep John alive to see the kids graduate from high school? Or would you, just these little prayers. Like, I love being married. I have the most amazing husband in the world. So I just couldn't imagine life without him. And I think that honesty of just like bringing all of that, because people would come up to me and they would say, isn't cancer just so good? It teaches you so many things. To which I say, don't say things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that cancer is not good. I don't think that sickness, and can God use it? Does he want to show us how he loves us through the pain? Sure. But I don't think there's anything good that is, in the sense of like, God isn't a God that throws cancer on his kids and then just asks us to figure our way out. But we live in the world that we do, in the bodies that we have, and there is suffering. And I think it was just, before I think I had language, I was just naming. We lost the life we had in our country that we had lived in for 17 years actually. And everything changed. And yet nothing changed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like everything around us shifted and our family was thrown into a little bit of chaos. But those years and the years up until now, God has been so near, Taylor. God's been so, so near to us.
When you think about God's nearness, how do you experience his heart and his posture towards you?
Oh, I think that's a lifetime of a journey. I think before John's cancer, I'd say probably 3 years, I'd been on a journey of just growing in my own awareness of myself. And I'd done, met with the counselor and with a mentor, and was doing work on the Enneagram and just learning about myself. And I began to, I would say probably 3 years before everything kind of unraveled, I was starting to keep a journal on just the things that I was thankful for. And it was like God was like tuning the eyes of my heart to see how good he is. And we had so much crisis. Like, we were in leadership over a lot of people and caring for a lot of families. And there was a lot of heartbreak all around us, including my ministry to special needs orphans and ministry to women in prostitution. So there was sorrow all around. But it was like God was just tuning the eyes of my heart to see his goodness. And I think it goes back to those early questions in the garden with Eve and Satan, where it's just that question, like, is he good? If he was really good, would he have held anything back from you? And I think that question still haunts us, haunts humanity. And I think it haunts God's children. Like in our darkest moments, it's that, is God really good? Is God really going to show up? And so I think that in cultivating a heart of gratitude, it was a way of preparing. I thought I was already on the marathon. And it was like the cancer journey began. It was like, oh, okay, this is the marathon. And I think there's ways that we can strengthen our muscles, our heart muscles, in the daily turning our hearts to God. So I think in the nearness, experiencing the nearness of God, I think it came by way, I just felt like his spirit, I began to hear him. It was almost like it just, his I just felt God just speaking to my heart, like on a daily basis. I would be like, God, are we going to be okay? And I could just almost hear him say, you will be okay because I am with you. And I would just hear like, God, what do you think? I remember in the middle of the night, just praying over my husband as he was recovering from surgery. And the days after, I mean, he's still on a oral chemo drug. It's not a kind of cancer they're releasing him from. We've done 11 years almost, but the doctors just said he's on this chemo drug that we are very grateful for. But I was praying for him one night and I was thinking, God, what do you think of him? What do you think about John? And I just felt like I heard the Lord say, oh, John, he's like my favorite. And I think it was just one of those like leaning in. It's this practice of leaning in. Lord, what do you think of what's going on in this moment? What do you think what's happening in me? Like inviting God in. He wants to be near to his kids. He wants us to experience his nearness, Taylor. That is what we have. Mm-hmm. In the middle of our darkness and pain, he wants to show up. He wants us to know his presence.
11 years is a long time. How do you keep moving forward with such an ongoing pain and lack of resolution?
Oh, some days there's a little bit of guilt, like when I meet friends who have lost a spouse or have lost a loved one, and I feel that little, like, well, how did we get to still have these 11 years? So there's that space where I can feel I don't know how to resolve some of that other than be present with whoever I'm with and hold and know that God is, as he is with us, he is with them. There's times where I think I might have a moment where I meet my own, impatience and my own annoyance. And then I feel bad because I think I should be happy John's here, but it's just my own humanity and living. So it's just this, I feel like it's every day is just a day to walk with the Lord. And there's times where I think, when I look at the future and I think maybe the next 5 years or 10, I get stuck. So it feels kind of black. It feels kind of dark. And then I have to remember that God has walked with us these 11 years that felt dark at the beginning. So it's a lot of just speaking to my soul of, we'll get there. John's oncologist always says, when I have questions, when we have to see him every 3 months. So it's quite familiar. This journey is very still in our face. But he always says, we'll get there when we get there. And I think, oh yeah, I think something that's been a comfort for me is just imagining God who is not bound by space and time, that he's already waiting for me in all my future moments. So my fear of being alone, which is a very real fear. My kids are all grown. 2 are married. The other 2 are out of the house. And I look at John and I think, will we get to do this next half of our life for a long time together? And then I have to just imagine, God, you're there in all the future moments, in what feels like darkness. He's there.
I'm thinking about the person who might be listening to this on their own 18-hour trip to a really devastating situation. or the person who might be sitting in a hospital right now and may feel terrified or angry or just all of the above, what would you say to that person?
I'd say that you are not alone. And I'd say that God loves you and He sees you, that He's with you and He wants you to experience His presence and His comfort. I think our greatest fear is, one of humanity's greatest fear is just aloneness, having to do it by ourselves. And I just say you don't have to do this by yourself. I think that one of the beautiful things about being a child of God is that we belong to the family of God. I don't know that we're always great at being in each other's lives, but I think we can love better. We can learn to just press in close. I recently said to a friend, a group of women I was speaking to, I said, could we be the people to stick around for the answer to how are you? What are you holding?
Yeah.
What's today been like for you? Could we wait long enough, even if it feels uncomfortable? Could we press up so close that it feels uncomfy, but it feels safe?
The kind of people that waits for the answer. I love that. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Jenn. I continue to learn so much from you and how you enter and stay in really hard spaces with so much grace. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Taylor. I've loved being with you.
Since my conversation with Jenn, I've been reflecting on her gentle invitations to continually bring our pain out of isolation and into community. Our crosses are too heavy to hold on our own. In His humanity, even Jesus needed help carrying His. One way that we can befriend our sorrow is by sharing it with someone who can receive it. I'll be sharing more reflections on how we might practice this well in this week's Substack. If you'd like to receive these Wednesday emails, you can subscribe through the link in the show notes. Until next week. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram at TaylorJoy. If this conversation was helpful and you'd like more information about my other offerings to engage your story more deeply, check out my website, taylorjoymurray.co.